Welcome back to the small holding. I was not planning on doing a video today because we are slap bang in the middle of a weather warning for wind. We're getting up to 60-mile-an-hour winds through here at the moment, so we're mostly just batten down the hatches and write off outside jobs for a couple of days. Even though I am out here doing stuff, it's not worth trying to bring the camera out when it's windy like this. You can't hear anything I'm saying. But something has happened and I thought I would share it with you. So I was out in the garden just checking up on things yesterday and I noticed this and I just walked away because I didn't want to deal with it, but it really does need to be dealt with. Basically, we've got blight, which is a massive bummer. I noticed out on the tomatoes yesterday. Anyway, I'll take you out and show you what it looks like, but it's not looking great, but I need to get on it and I thought we could chat about what can even be done at this point. Now, if you don't know, blight is a fungal-like disease that affects our tomatoes and potatoes, and basically there is no cure. Once you've got it, then that is it. You know, once it's on a plant, that plant is not going to recover. So really prevention is the game here, which obviously I have not done. I don't know whether or not I could have avoided it. At the end of the day, it's been a very wet and warm, muggy kind of summer. There's been so much water on these plants, they've barely dried out, so it is kind of a prime recipe for blight. But that being said, there are things you can do to reduce the risk of your plants getting blight, so maybe we could chat about that and I can show you what I didn't do and what I could have therefore done, and I guess we'll talk about what I'm going to do about it right now. In terms of, while I can't cure the plants that have already got it, I'm going to do what I can to slow the progress and to maximise the harvest that I might still be able to get off of the tomatoes in my garden. What I'm going to do today is grab a waste bag and a fork, and I'm basically going to try and remove all the disease. It's windy. I'm basically going to just try and remove all of the diseased plant matter out there, put it in a bag, don't let it mix with anything, then make sure that I do a really good job of sterilising all my tools and anything that's touched it, because it spreads. I think it's inevitable that it's in my garden now. That is what it is for this year, but I can do my best to remove as much of the diseased plant as I possibly can. So that's going to mean pulling out a few plants, snipping off any diseased branches that look like the leaves have been affected already on other plants. I'll show you. You might not be able to hear me though, so I might end up having to voice over all of this, but I'll take you out and I'll show you how it looks at the moment. So we just headed over to where I spotted the problem yesterday, which is just in this bed here, and oh my gosh, it was so much worse in just the one day. So this is what blight on tomato plants looks like. It starts with these black spots on the leaves, but just FYI, there's loads of reasons why there could be black spots on tomato leaves, so don't necessarily jump to the conclusion that you've got blight straight away. The giveaway is the black spots on the stems. These will spread and eventually rot away the stem, and the disease also then spreads to the fruit, and I'll show you what that looks like in a bit. So here I'm just clearing away as much of the diseased plant as I can. These are my San Marzano tomato plants, which are a determinate / bush variety, and because they're a bush variety, I did not prune them. I just spaced them as described on the seed packet and then left them to get on with things. And on reflection, this is probably what's allowed the perfect conditions for blight to take over this bed of plants. Blight loves warm and wet conditions, so to avoid it, it's best practice to keep the leaves of tomato plants as dry as possible. And we should also allow good spacing between the plants to allow for good air circulation around the base of the plant, as well as pruning of any excess foliage, even in a bush variety. A lot of people will say that bush varieties don't need pruning, but consider your conditions when heeding this advice, as I should have done. If you're growing in a nice warm summer in a greenhouse, then you could probably get away with just leaving them unpruned. But here I've grown them outside in a particularly wet and overcast summer. The leaves have been rained on like most days and they haven't had the chance to dry out. So pruning could potentially have stopped this from happening. But, you know, we'll never really know. Now this is just me showing you what blight on fruit themselves looks like. You can see these brown patches. They will eventually just rot in and ruin the fruit as well. So these have to go in the burn pile too. The absolute best way to avoid blight is to grow your tomatoes under glass or in a greenhouse or a polytunnel, and then that way you can control the amount of watering that they get and keep the leaves dry by watering the soil rather than from above. I am separating out the fruits that don't look affected. I don't have a plan for them yet. It just seemed too sad to throw them straight out if they weren't affected yet. think when something like this happens, it's important to keep perspective. I mean, I don't want to be patronising and say, you know, not to be upset. It is obviously very upsetting. You know, you put in all this work only for something like this to happen. By the end of the day, this is not rare. You know, most people who've spent a few years growing tomatoes will probably have dealt with blight at some point, especially in this country. I don't want to speak for anywhere else, but here, you know, the UK is not a native place for tomatoes. We do not have the ideal conditions, as a wonderful example. And unless you're lucky enough to have somewhere to put them undercover, then this is an inevitability for some people. You know, I have dealt with blight before. I've also had years where I've not seen any of it and everything's just been beautiful and fine. So it does suck, but you know, all is not lost. I think, you know, take your time, have your emotions, but ultimately there's still something that we can do to help the rest of the garden this year. So that's what I'm focusing on now, doing what I can do to save as much of this harvest as I possibly can. And if that means making some sacrifices, well, you know what, these were never going to ripen on this plant. This plant is so diseased, these would just rot away. It hurts to chop them down yourself, but it's no different to just standing here and watching these rot and pass all this disease on to every other tomato plant in this garden. So hopefully I can slow the spread a little bit by getting rid of any bit of obvious diseased plant now, and that might just mean my tomatoes back there have a chance. I'm basically just on damage control. You know, it's not the end of the world. I mean, there's no saving these plants. These plants are absolutely going to die, and the rest of my tomato plants will probably follow. But that doesn't mean there's no more hope. I've got them spread across this garden, so hopefully, if I can slow the progress a bit, that will give a chance for some of the other plants to ripen up some of their fruit before disease inevitably gets them. So, you know, it's not end game to the point where, you know, you just pull all the plants out and give up hope of tomatoes. It's just, at this point, if you're seeing what I'm seeing now, oh, it's starting to rain. That's just perfect. If you're seeing what I'm seeing now, then you do need to start to adjust your expectations of how many tomatoes you're going to get. You'll get some if you do what you can, but you know, there's a lot lost here. That is what it is. Right, I'm going to get this lot in and get myself in, because this has been depressing enough, and I'll come out when the rain breaks and finish up. Alright, before I run inside and hide from the rain and get myself a big old glass of wine, I'm going to grab me some ripe tomatoes, because my brain needs it. Look. So there we go. I'll keep you up to date with how the harvest progresses. We've already had some tomatoes. I'm sure we will still get some more. It's just how many we get before disease completely takes over, but we'll see. So I'm not going to be composting any of those plants that we took out today. That's all just going to sit in this bag inside until we do our next fire, and then it's all going on the fire. Then I will take some joy in watching those blasted things burn. This is just a reality of gardening. At the end of the day, not everything goes our way. Some things have done great this year and some things aren't going to do well, and wet and soggy, not very sunny summers are always going to be difficult for keeping the blight off tomatoes in a place like this. So here's what it is. I hope that it's useful to have, seen an example of it, and it's given me a lot to think about in terms of what I can do. I'm always going to be, tomatoes are always going to get a bit soggy. Living in Wales, even if we have a great year, chances are we get a bit too much rain for the ideal tomato environment. So, it's given me some thoughts about what I can change. And in an ideal world, I would grow them under glass or in a polytunnel or something, because that mostly negates the risk, purely because they're out of the wind and it can't be carried onto them. But obviously that involves having one of those things, which I don't have. I don't suppose I will for next year, but I'm working on it. Here's to the future. Cheers, guys.